Hello, all. Will Chandler here. As you know, I'm just waiting on my daughter to get done with some activities to pick her up. And I wanted to talk about uh, culture, cult, U-R-E, culture. And it's not a new topic. It's not a new one. That's something I've thought about for many years. It's evolved over time. And you'll also find a lot of videos by ex Jehovah's Witnesses and not just other people not related to JWs. You can find plenty of videos about the word cult and culture, and I find it. I actually just watched a TED talk the other night too. It's a couple months old, done by an ex Jehovah's Witness. I think her name was Melania or something like that. Anyway, and she talks about culture and how cults appear to be everywhere and what cults can teach us. And it's funny to me because when you really do start looking at it and start looking at what a cult means and what culture means, it's pretty much the same thing. It's very similar, at least in its origins. And there's pros and cons to culture and being in a cult. And I think one thing that at least I feel called to do for a long time is to question everything. I think I felt probably called to do that, since I was a kid, which is part of the reason why I was able to exit the Jehovah's Witnesses at a young age because I, had a desire to look beyond and to look outside my own bubble. And take like my background with the military. There's a culture, they call it the military culture, and then take that even smaller into combat arms. And a lot of the things that is in our culture are counterintuitive to a lot of society, to a lot of people that aren't used to that environment. The fact that you're not running away, you're standing and fighting, or that if you get attacked, a lot of the time, especially in small units, depending on situation, obviously, that what you're going to do is you're going to advance. You're gonna hit back harder, and a lot of times the enemy, it'll throw them off because they're like, here we are attacking a force that's smaller, and you can a lot of times rout the enemy that's larger than you by actually advancing when you're under attack by a superior force. And that's not some new military tactic. It's training. It's a mental state, and that's part of our culture. But it could also seem like cult-like behavior to a lot of people, and that's where I think when I use the word cult, I'm more thinking of someone that is very narrow minded that would say in that situation you always advance. Well, no, you don't always advance when you get attacked. Sometimes you gotta draw back, you gotta retreat. Because if you just took a cult like mindset to it, then well you're eventually you're gonna end up dead. And so it's kinda like I find it fascinating from a sociological and psychological perspective. Um, Take in Christianity, something I've questioned a lot lately is the nature of God and how a lot of Trinitarians and a lot of Christians view God and the concept of monotheism. I don't really know if that truly applies to the biblical Jesus or the biblical God. Um, when you go back to the Hebrew and you look at the word Elohim, which is plural, used for God, so it's more than one. You go to the word Echad, which is where it states in the Hebrew that God is one. That's also the same word used for saying that a marriage couple is one. And now when we look in the cultures that existed around the biblical people from, Old Testament and New Testament, you're going to find that they were surrounded in most cases with pantheons of gods that were believed in by different peoples. One distinction that is made biblically in the Bible, the God of the Bible versus all these other nations with their gods, is that there was always infighting, there's always jockeying for a position. One god was always unhappy with another. They punished each other. It's a big mess, right? No surprise, if you know history at all. And so take that concept and look at when it says God is one. So if you look at God as being in human terms now, I'm not saying this is the way it is. I'm trying to explain it so one can grasp the concept. That's how I kind of grasp the concept of what I've been mulling over for quite some time. Is if we look at God as a species, or as someone put it in a video recently, I forget the guy's name, or if we look at him as a race of beings, and maybe it's just three beings, the Trinity, like, fine. But in human terms, that would still be a different race, a different species than us. Again, human, English explanation of it. So you have a oneness that exists in the biblical God, the biblical versus a pantheon of gods that is always infighting and there's never unity. And then I think it's Philippians 1:6, I think. I have to double check. Where it says, a lot of you will be familiar with this, where it says that even though being in very nature God, that Jesus didn't look at equality or rulership as something to be grasped. So again, if you think of God as a species or as a different race of beings, then there is a clear distinction being made between the pantheons of gods surrounding that were known outside of Christianity and Jewish tradition versus so yeah, you get what I'm trying to say. There's a big difference being made, a clear line being made of distinction between the gods of surrounding nations and the God of the Bible. So let's say we look at the Christian God as not necessarily just one, but monotheism is in one race of gods. But so let's say, according biblically, that there's three of them. But it actually is a different race. And again, explaining it in human terms and English terms. Even if that's the case, what difference does it make, though, at the end of the day? Does that change any of the beliefs that exist if you're a Christian? Does it matter if it is just a race of three other beings? Or, I mean, really, does that actually change anything? But then at the same time, is it actually monotheism? But does that really matter? And that's where the whole topic of cults and culture and challenging ideas you have, challenging these suppositions, the dogma that exists in your culture, and asking why. And I can't see how it's a bad thing to actually question. And that's where it's hard in talking with Jehovah's Witnesses, because they aren't supposed to question anything. But how do you actually grow if you don't question, if you don't challenge your beliefs and make sure of everything, right? And when you look at the story of Jesus, that's what he did. He challenged the known way of thinking. He turned everything on its head. Even his lineage names women in his lineage. Now, in Jewish culture and Jewish tradition, society, it was never a woman that was named in the bloodline. It was always men. So you even have, so you have a distinction being made of the bloodlines and where they say Jesus' lineage comes from. It was counter to the culture of Jewish tradition. And when you look at the parables that Jesus gave, again, he's getting them to think. He could have said just black and white, this is the way it is, but he was trying to kind of kickstart this different way of thinking to counteract the culture that these people existed in, to counteract the cult of their existence. And when you really get in, especially into the Greek and the Hebrew, that becomes so much more evident. But then play it forward to today, and I view a lot of Christianity to have fallen right back into the Pharisaical and Jewish tradition, Jewish culture type of thing. And anyway, those are my thoughts for right now. I just kind of wanted to share that. And yeah, that about sums it up for now. Y'all take it easy.